For hundreds, even thousands of years, the strength of a city, well, it all came down to its walls. The higher, the thicker, the better. They were a symbol of power, of safety. But what happens when a brilliant piece of engineering, an unstoppable force, comes up against that supposedly immovable object? Well, that's the story we're diving into today, the story of the catapult. I mean, just imagine you're a commander back in the day, staring up at an enemy city. How do you possibly conquer something that seems unconquerable? Sure, you could try to starve them out, but that could take months, even years. Or you could get creative and figure out a way to just smash right through their greatest defense. And for centuries, the answer to that problem was simply the wall. These massive stone fortifications were pretty much the ultimate defensive tech of their time. They stopped cavalry dead in their tracks, they blunted infantry charges. Honestly, trying a direct assault was basically a suicide mission. So if you wanted to conquer a city, you had to defeat its walls. And that, well, that was going to require a whole new kind of weapon. All right, so let's get into the first launchers. How did they solve this massive problem? Well, the answer wasn't some lone inventor having a eureka moment. No, it was actually a deliberate state-sponsored R&D program, all laser-focused on one thing: taking down the wall. This story really kicks off back in 399 BC with a guy named Dionysius the Elder, the ruler of Syracuse. He was staring down a long, nasty war with Carthage, and he needed an edge. So what did he do? He basically created an ancient think tank. He gathered the smartest people he could find, threw money at them, and set them loose with one single goal: invent new weapons. And out of this, you could almost call it an ancient Manhattan Project, came the very first catapults. And the genius of these first machines was just how simple they were. They were basically giant mechanized crossbows. You've got your stock, a slider, and the really important parts, a winch and a trigger. See, this mechanization completely changed the game. Armies weren't limited by how strong a single archer was anymore. You could suddenly build a bow that was way, way too powerful for any person to draw by hand because this machine did all the heavy lifting for you. Now, the mechanized bow, that was a huge leap, for sure. But the real revolution, the thing that would truly change siege warfare forever, was right around the corner. The next big idea wasn't about bending wood anymore. It was all about the power of twisting rope. And this brings us to the power of torsion. Okay, so this right here was the real game changer. The big idea was this: instead of storing energy by bending a bow, what if you could get way more power by twisting huge bundles of elastic fibers, like animal sinew or even hair? By forcing a big, rigid arm against the insane tension of these twisted ropes, engineers unlocked a level of power that was just unimaginable before. This is where we go from a clever machine to a true wall-shattering siege engine. And they weren't just brute force weapons either. Listen to this from Julius Caesar talking about the siege of Avaricum in 52 BC. His catapults had no trouble shooting down Gaulish warriors one after another. This tells you these things weren't just powerful, they were also incredibly precise. A torsion catapult could be aimed so well you could hit the same spot on a wall again and again. Think about that. They weren't just chucking rocks randomly. They were basically sniping defenders from hundreds of meters out. Of course, the Romans, being the master engineers they were, took this design and perfected it. They created the onager. It was a single-armed torsion engine that was simpler, tougher, and it became the absolute workhorse of the Roman legions. And the name? It's great. It comes from the Latin for wild ass, because apparently when this thing fired, the whole machine would just kick backwards violently, just like a donkey. So for a long, long time, torsion was king on the battlefields of the West. But while all that was happening, a totally different idea, using a completely different source of power, was slowly but surely making its way from the East. This was the traction revolution. Check this out. Way back in the 4th century BC, right around the time the Greeks were inventing their first catapults, engineers in China had already come up with something else entirely: the traction trebuchet. But look at this timeline. It took almost 1,000 years for that tech to travel all the way west. It probably journeyed along the Silk Road and was introduced to the Mediterranean world by peoples like the Avars. That's an incredible journey for an idea. So what's the big difference here? Torsion versus traction. Well, think of it like this. The torsion engines, the Roman ones, were these complex, high-tension machines, super powerful, but they took a while to reload. The traction trebuchet, on the other hand, which became known as the mangonel, was way simpler. All its power came from a crew of guys yanking down on ropes. That's it. This meant it was way faster to fire and a lot easier to build. You were basically trading a bit of raw power for a much higher rate of fire.
Okay, so we've got these two competing technologies, torsion and traction, battling it out for centuries. But the final evolution was still to come. And this one would harness the most powerful and reliable force on the entire planet, gravity.
Sometime around the 12th century, a brand new design shows up in the Mediterranean, the counterweight trebuchet. And the idea behind it is so simple, it's brilliant. What if you took that whole team of men pulling on ropes and you replaced them with one single massive counterweight? You just slowly winch this huge box filled with tons of rock and dirt up into the air, storing a mind-boggling amount of potential energy, all just waiting to be unleashed. And the result? Well, just look at this chart. It's absolutely staggering. Your typical Roman onager could maybe throw a stone that's, 26 kilograms? That's like a heavy suitcase. But the medieval counterweight trebuchet, it could launch something weighing 100 kilograms or even more. That's not a small step up, it was a quantum leap in destructive power. It's no surprise that this thing became known as the most powerful weapon of the Middle Ages. The counterweight trebuchet was, without a doubt, the apex predator of the medieval battlefield. It threw heavier rocks, farther, and with more force than anything that had ever come before it. This was the weapon that could actually turn a solid castle wall into a pile of dust. So let's talk about the catapult's long shadow. I mean, for a while there, the reign of the trebuchet seemed absolute. But like every technology, its time at the top had to end. And yet, its story doesn't just stop on some medieval battlefield. The age of the catapult finally came to an end with the arrival of a new and much louder technology: gunpowder. At the end of the day, chemical energy just proved to be more powerful than mechanical energy. Cannons could hit harder, they were easier to move around, and eventually they became more reliable. Gunpowder simply made the great stone-throwing engines of the past obsolete, closing the book on an era of warfare that had lasted for almost 2,000 years. But the catapult isn't totally gone, right? It still lives on today. You can go see these huge working replicas, like the massive one at Warwick Castle, launching things for cheering crowds. Engineering students build them for competitions. You see them in movies all the time. And here's a crazy twist. The simple, brutally effective design of the trebuchet has even been used by some insurgent groups in modern conflicts. It's just a testament to how effective the basic design still is. When you really think about it, the story of the catapult is all about human ingenuity, right? It's about finding a way to overcome these huge obstacles. It proved that no defense, no matter how tough it seems, is permanent when a new idea comes along. And that kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? What are the walls of our world today, social, economic, technological, that are being broken down by the engineering of our own time?